The words cut through the debate stage like a blade. Karoline Leavitt leaned forward, her voice sharp, her face cold, and she spat the line that would ripple across America. Go back to India. For a moment, everything froze. The air itself seemed to thicken, pressing down on the audience. Reporters paused mid-type, their fingers trembling over keyboards. The cameras caught every detail, the glint in Leavitt's eyes, the flicker of disbelief on Patel's face, and the stunned silence that swallowed the room. It wasn't just another political jab, it was a wound torn open in front of millions. A phrase that carried the weight of every immigrant's struggle, every family's fight to belong, every insult whispered in hallways and shouted in the streets. The audience gasped as if one breath had been stolen from the entire room. A few tried to clap, awkward and unsure, but their sound was drowned by the uneasy silence of a nation watching live. In living rooms from New York to California, televisions replayed the words in stunned disbelief. On social media, the clip began to spread before the moderators even regained control. Did she just say that? Posts flooded timelines. Hashtags sprang up, furious and unrelenting, and the nation began to divide in real time, outrage on one side, justification on the other. Yet at the center of the storm, Kash Patel did not flinch. He didn't hurl back an insult or raise his voice. His calm presence, his steady breath, stood in dramatic contrast to Leavitt's venom. In that silence, he seemed to grow taller, stronger, a man carrying not just his own dignity, but the dignity of every immigrant family who had ever been told they didn't belong. The moderators shuffled their papers nervously. The audience shifted in their seats. Leavitt, emboldened by her own words, smirked as if expecting Patel to crumble, to shrink under the weight of her insult. But the opposite happened. The silence became electric, a suspense that gripped everyone in the room. What would Patel say? Would he lash out? Would he walk away? Or would he let the insult hang unanswered, leaving the crowd unsettled and divided? America leaned closer to its screens. The cameras zoomed in on Patel's face, and then he spoke. But no one expected how Kash Patel would respond. To understand the weight of that moment, you have to step back and see where it all began. This wasn't just another political gathering. It was a nationally televised debate, a stage built not only for policy but for spectacle. And both candidates knew it. The auditorium was buzzing long before the cameras went live. A restless crowd of activists, students, veterans, and journalists crammed into their seats waiting for fireworks. They got more than they bargained for. The debate topic was supposed to be about the future of America, jobs, security, leadership. But beneath the surface lay something rawer, something more dangerous. The question of identity. Who gets to define American? Who belongs and who will always be treated as an outsider? That's why Leavitt's words stung so deeply. They weren't just an attack on Patel. They were an attack on millions watching at home, children of immigrants, first-generation Americans, families who had traded everything for a chance at the American promise. Her words reopened an old wound, one this country has never fully healed, and yet the stakes weren't only personal. They were political, cultural, generational. For every voter watching, this exchange became more than a soundbite. It became a test of character. Would America reward arrogance dressed as patriotism, or would it embrace dignity as true strength? Cameras panned the audience, capturing the tension written across their faces. Some shook their heads in disbelief, lips pursed in outrage. Others leaned forward, hungry for more confrontation, secretly thrilled by the chaos unfolding. The divide was visible, alive in the very air. On Twitter, the hashtags were already trending. Shall go back to India. Patel for America. Stand with immigrants. The clash wasn't just on stage, it was spilling into living rooms, into coffee shop conversations, into the digital bloodstream of the nation. People who had never even heard of Kash Patel or Karoline Leavitt were suddenly pulled into the storm, compelled to pick a side. This wasn't just an insult. It became a defining moment for how America sees itself. Was the nation still chained to the narrow vision of ancestry and skin color, or had it finally grown into the broader promise of equality and belonging? And for Kash Patel, it was personal. His family's story mirrored those of countless immigrants, a story of sacrifice, hard work, and faith in a country that didn't always welcome them with open arms. Every insult hurled at him wasn't just about him. It echoed against every parent who worked double shifts. Every Karoline Leavitt did not stumble onto the stage by accident. She had built her persona carefully, piece by piece, rising from obscurity into the national spotlight with a brash confidence that drew as much criticism as it did admiration. To her supporters, she was bold, unafraid, the kind of politician who told it like it is. To her critics, she was reckless, arrogant, and willing to cross lines others wouldn't dare approach. Her rise mirrored the kind of politics that had come to dominate the American stage: quick sound bites, sharp elbows, and a talent for provocation. She cut her teeth as a fiery communications aide, learning the art of framing opponents not just as rivals, but as enemies. Every microphone became a weapon, every camera lens an opportunity to perform. Soon, she wasn't just speaking for others. She was running for herself, carrying that same unapologetic style into debates where volume and spectacle often counted more than substance. Leavitt wrapped herself in the flag at every opportunity, branding herself as the voice of real Americans. She posed with veterans, praised the working class, and spoke of tradition and patriotism. But beneath the polished slogans, her strategy was clear: division. She didn't unite her audience. She electrified them by pointing at someone else to blame. Immigrants, outsiders, elites. Always an enemy, always a threat. It was a formula that guaranteed attention, if not respect. That night on the debate stage, her instincts took over. The sight of Kash Patel, calm, collected, an immigrant son who had risen to positions of real influence in Washington, was too tempting a target. To Leavitt, he wasn't just a political opponent. He was the embodiment of the America she wanted to caricature: diverse, cosmopolitan, a story of belonging that didn't fit into her narrow box of identity. So she struck. And in striking, she revealed more about herself than she ever intended. The contradiction was glaring. Here was a woman who shouted about American values, yet reached for one of the oldest, ugliest lines in the book, telling another citizen to go back. The phrase was not only cruel, it was historically loaded, echoing decades of prejudice hurled at waves of immigrants who had built the very country she claimed to defend. The irony was inescapable. While she wrapped herself in patriotism, her words betrayed an insecurity, a fear of the very diversity that had always defined America's strength. The press had long described her as ambitious, but also prone to overreach. Her critics noted that she thrived on outrage, mistaking cruelty for courage. And as she stood on that stage, leaning into her insult with the smirk of someone who believed she had landed a knockout blow, the seeds of her undoing were already planted, because the very words she chose would soon become her undoing. In the hours that followed, as clips spread across social media and headlines blared across digital newsrooms, many began to ask the question: was this the real face of her? Politics. For years, she had managed to skirt that line, provocative enough to make noise, careful enough to claim deniability. But here, on live television, there was no denying what had been said. No edits, no excuses, no hiding behind spin. America had heard her, loud and clear. And yet, in that very moment, Leavitt was convinced she had won. She mistook silence for victory, Patel's calm for weakness. She believed that her insult had landed like a dagger. What she didn't realize was that the silence was not weakness. It was preparation. It was the deep breath before the storm. She had set the stage, but she had set it for her own downfall, because what Karoline Leavitt didn't know, what she couldn't have known, was that the man she had just insulted was not only prepared to answer, but to answer in a way that would leave the nation talking for weeks to come. But Leavitt didn't know the man she had just insulted. Kash Patel's story did not begin under the bright lights of a debate stage. It began in a small home shaped by sacrifice, where his immigrant parents carried dreams bigger than their means. They had come to America with little more than determination, a belief that this country, despite its flaws, could offer a fair shot at building a better life. His father worked long hours, his hands calloused from labor that often went unnoticed, but was essential to the very fabric of the community. His mother balanced family and work with quiet resilience, instilling in her children the values of discipline, gratitude, and dignity. For Patel, childhood was a mix of challenges and lessons. He grew up hearing stories about how opportunity was not something handed over freely. It was something earned, often through struggle. At school, he excelled but never forgot the subtle reminders that he was different. The looks, the whispers, the occasional insult, they were real, but they did not break him. Instead, they shaped him. Every obstacle became fuel. Every doubt became a reason to push harder. Driven by those values, Patel pursued education with intensity, choosing the law as his path. He believed in the Constitution not as a distant document, but as a living promise, one that applied to families like his, who had built a life from scratch. His legal career was not about power, it was about service, about standing up for those who couldn't. That sense of duty carried him further. Patel entered public service, taking on roles in national security and government that demanded both precision and calm under pressure. While others courted fame or applause, he focused on results. Colleagues came to know him as steady, unshakable, a man who listened more than he spoke, who weighed his words carefully, and who placed truth above theatrics. Unlike Leavitt's path of provocation and sound bites, Patel's rise was built quietly, brick by brick. He wasn't the loudest voice in the room, but often the most respected. His colleagues knew that when Patel spoke, he carried the weight of experience, the credibility of someone who had done the work, and the integrity of someone who understood what was truly at stake. Yet beneath the calm professionalism was something deeper: pride in his roots. Patel never shied away from his heritage. He embraced it as proof that America's promise was alive. To him, being the son of immigrants was not a weakness, but his greatest strength. It gave him perspective, empathy, and the determination to ensure others could feel the belonging that his parents had once struggled to find. That pride carried into his public presence. When he spoke about service, it was not abstract. It was the story of his family. When he defended American values, it wasn't theory and it was lived reality. And when he faced critics who tried to reduce him to where he came from, he answered not with anger, but with a reminder of what America truly meant: a nation built by immigrants, shaped by diversity, and defined by resilience. That's why the insult struck so deeply. Not because Patel hadn't heard it before, he had. Every immigrant, every child of immigrants knew those words. They were the blunt weapon of those who feared change, the lazy attack of those who could not compete with substance. He had faced it as a boy, as a student, even as a professional. But on that debate stage, the insult wasn't aimed at a child or a worker or an individual. It was aimed at every immigrant family watching, every American who had ever been told they didn't belong. For Patel, this was more than politics. It was personal. It was identity. It was a chance to show America what dignity looked like in the face of hate. And that's why, when the insult came, Patel didn't flinch. The debate hall had already been rattled by Leavitt's first insult. But what followed was a steady escalation, a clash that gripped every soul in the room. The moderator, visibly shaken, tried to steer the discussion back to policy, but Leavitt wasn't finished. She leaned forward, her voice rising, the edge in her tone sharpening with every syllable. "This is America," she declared, her eyes narrowing at Patel. "And if you don't like it, maybe you should leave. People like you don't understand what real Americans stand for." The words landed like stones tossed into a silent lake, heavy, deliberate, echoing outward. The audience shifted uneasily, some gasping, some whispering to their neighbors. Reporters hunched over their laptops, fingers flying furiously as they captured every line, knowing headlines were being written in real time. Patel did not react. He didn't roll his eyes, didn't smirk, didn't even blink with irritation. Instead, he sat still, his hands folded calmly on the podium, his silence transforming into a statement louder than words. Leavitt, sensing the attention on her, pressed harder. "You stand here pretending to know what's best for this country, but your values don't come from here. You don't share the roots, the heritage, the blood that built this nation. You should admit it." The room bristled. Some in the audience shifted uncomfortably, others shook their heads, appalled. But there were also murmurs of approval from her supporters, their whispers carrying just enough for the cameras to catch faces nodding in agreement. It was the theater of division, playing out live before a nation. The moderators exchanged nervous glances, powerless to intervene without seeming biased. Social media was already in flames, the insults clipped, subtitled, and posted within seconds. Millions were watching live, millions more were about to watch on loop. And through it all, Patel remained composed. The stillness of his body contrasted violently with Leavitt's restless energy. She jabbed with her words like a fighter throwing punches, but he stood as immovable as stone. His calm unnerved her, though she pretended not to notice. She tried again. "You don't belong here, Patel. People are tired of outsiders coming in and telling us how to live. Why don't you just admit it?" The insult wasn't new, but the brazenness of saying it under the bright lights, with cameras rolling, stunned the audience. A ripple of discomfort ran through the room. Gasps gave way to silence, and silence gave way to suspense. Still, Patel didn't move. His silence had shifted from passive restraint to active defiance. It wasn't weakness. It was power. The longer he waited, the more the tension grew. His composure made her insults echo louder, exposing their cruelty without him needing to say a word. By now, the hall was divided into two camps, those outraged and those emboldened. But all were captivated. The scene had moved beyond debate. It had become theater, a test of character that every viewer could feel in their bones. The moderators leaned forward, their eyes darting between the two. Leavitt, sensing the silence, swallowing her words, sneered as if daring Patel to finally speak. The cameras zoomed in, the air so tense it seemed to vibrate, and then, slowly, Patel leaned into the microphone, and America held its breath. The silence was suffocating. Every camera lens zoomed in, every phone in the audience held steady, every reporter's fingers hovered above their keyboards. Karoline Leavitt leaned back with a smug expression, convinced she had cornered her opponent. Kash Patel, however, took his time. He adjusted the microphone, looked calmly at Leavitt, then turned his gaze to the audience. And in that pause, the nation seemed to stop breathing. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, deep, deliberate. "You tell me to go back to India," he began, his words slicing through the silence like a blade through glass. "But let me tell you a story. My parents came here with nothing but faith in America, faith that this country could give their children a better life if they worked hard, sacrificed, and served." The hall stirred. A low murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Leavitt's smirk faltered. Just slightly. Patel continued, his tone unflinching. My father worked in a factory until his hands bled. My mother worked nights so she could be there for us in the mornings. They didn't ask for handouts. They didn't complain. They believed in America more deeply than many people who were born here ever could. Gasps turned to nods. Nods turned to claps. Reporters typed feverishly, aware they were witnessing history. Patel's words weren't just rebuttal. They were a reclamation. And me? He pressed on, his voice rising with conviction. I became a public servant. I worked in the justice system. I defended this nation's security. I stood in rooms where decisions were made about protecting every American life, no matter what they looked like, no matter where they came from. That's what service means. That's what being American means. The first wave of applause broke out. Small, at first, but growing. A thunderclap beginning in the back rows, rolling toward the stage. The moderator raised a hand to quiet the crowd, but it was useless. The audience was caught in the moment. Patel raised his hand gently, asking for silence. His composure commanded respect. When the room quieted again, he leaned closer to the mic, his tone sharper now. So, Ms. Leavitt, he said, his eyes locking on hers. You tell me to go back to India. But I ask you, where exactly do you want me to go back from? From the courtroom where I fought for justice. From the offices of national security where I defended this land? From the oath I swore to uphold the Constitution of the United States of America? The crowd erupted. Applause thundered. People rose to their feet. Even those who had sat quietly, unsure where they stood, were swept into the wave of approval. Leavitt's face flushed red. She shifted uncomfortably, her jaw tightening as her confidence cracked. Patel let the cheers rise, then spoke over them, his voice cutting clear and precise. This country doesn't belong to those who try to divide it by telling others they don't belong. It belongs to those who sacrifice for it, who believe in it, who build it stronger every single day. That's my family, that's me, that's millions of immigrants whose love for America is proven in sweat, sacrifice, and service. By now the crowd was roaring. Reporters weren't just typing anymore. They were tweeting, posting, streaming. Social media lit up with hashtags, Kash Patel for America, mic drop moment, American is service. Clips of the exchange spread instantly, flooding timelines, outrunning even the debate broadcast itself. And Patel wasn't finished. He steadied himself, lowered his voice, and spoke with piercing clarity. So if you think my birthplace defines my Americanness, you've missed the very soul of this nation. America is not about where you start. It's about what you give. And I will never apologize for giving everything I have to this country, because America is my home. The words landed like thunder. The audience rose again, this time in a standing ovation that refused to die down. Leavitt's eyes darted toward the moderator, searching for rescue, but there was none. The cameras captured her tightened lips, the sweat beginning to glisten on her forehead. She had hurled an insult meant to diminish Patel, but instead she had elevated him, handed him the perfect stage to embody dignity and pride. Patel stood still, hands folded in front of him, not milking the applause, but letting it wash over the hall. His restraint only deepened the impact. When the ovation finally settled, he delivered the final blow, soft, controlled, devastating. You see, Ms. Leavitt, the difference between you and me is simple. You weaponize the word American to divide. I live it to unite. And that's why, no matter what you say, I'm not going anywhere. I am America. My family is America. And no insult can ever change that. The room exploded again. The ovation, longer, louder, uncontainable. Even some of Leavitt's allies caught on camera could not resist nodding in reluctant respect. The moment was not just a response. It was a transformation. Patel had turned an attack into an anthem, a personal insult into a universal truth. Leavitt tried to recover, attempting a smirk, raising her hand as if to interject, but the crowd drowned her out. She was no longer in control of the stage. The balance of power had shifted entirely. Reporters tweeted phrases like, "The defining moment of the debate," "Leavitt destroyed by Patel's dignity," "A masterclass in grace under fire." Within minutes, Patel's speech was trending across every platform. Clips racked up millions of views before the debate even ended. The narrative was no longer hers. It was his. And as Patel took his seat, calm as ever, the crowd still buzzing, one thought pulsed through the entire hall and echoed out into the country. This wasn't just a debate, it was a declaration. But the real shock came after the debate. Here's Section 7, The Aftermath Shockwaves, 800 words draft. Building the ripple effects exactly how you wanted. The debate stage emptied, but the energy refused to die. In fact, it spread like wildfire. What began as a heated exchange inside the hall quickly exploded across the country, igniting a cultural and political moment that no one could ignore. Within minutes of Patel's counterattack, Twitter, or rather X, was ablaze. Hashtags surged to the top of the trending list. Patel McDrop, Patel for America, Leavitt exposed, and the most viral of all, go back to service, a phrase that flipped Leavitt's insult into a rallying cry. Clips of Patel's remarks flooded timelines. Users from every corner of the political spectrum shared the video, often with captions like, "This is what leadership looks like." The moment Karoline Leavitt lost the debate, Patel didn't just defend himself, he defended America. Memes were inevitable. One viral image showed Patel calmly adjusting the microphone with the caption, "Sit down, watch, and learn." Another superimposed his face on Captain America holding the shield, with the words, "I am America." The creativity was endless and devastating for Leavitt's image. Journalists weighed in almost instantly. Mainstream outlets ran breaking banners. Patel turns insult into powerful rebuttal. Columnists called it a masterclass in composure and the defining moment of the campaign. Even critics who had little affection for Patel admitted that his response was surgical in its precision. Celebrities added to the wave. A-list actors, musicians, and sports icons shared their admiration for Patel's poise. One famous NFL player tweeted, "That's how you clap back without losing your cool. Respect." A Hollywood actress posted the clip on Instagram with the caption, "Chills. This is the America I believe in." The shockwaves weren't limited to entertainment. Rival politicians, even those who had little to gain from supporting Patel, spoke up. A Democratic congresswoman tweeted, "Disagree with him on policy, but that was courage. That was America." On the Republican side, some of Leavitt's own colleagues stayed conspicuously silent, unwilling to tie themselves to the sinking ship of her remark. Meanwhile, Leavitt faced a storm. Her defenders tried spinning the insult as a slip of the tongue or taken out of context, but the internet was unforgiving. The raw clip played on loop, overlaid with subtitles and dramatic music, stripping away any hope of damage control. Every attempt at defense was instantly ratioed, the replies flooded with memes and outrage. Inside political circles, strategists began whispering about long-term consequences. Some wondered if Leavitt's career had just been irreparably damaged. Others speculated that Patel's performance had launched him onto the national stage in a way no campaign ad ever could. Cable news amplified it further. Primetime anchors replayed the moment again and again, dissecting every pause, every facial expression, every roar from the crowd. Pundits compared it to historic debate takedowns, moments that transcended politics and entered the cultural memory. On YouTube and TikTok, reaction videos multiplied. Influencers, commentators, and even high school students recorded themselves watching the clip, often gasping, laughing, or cheering when Patel delivered his knockout lines. One teenager's video where she screamed, "Let's go!" after Patel declared, "I am America," racked up over 10 million views in 24 hours. Even late-night comedians joined the pile-on. One host joked, "Karoline Leavitt told Patel to go back to India. Patel told her to go back to history class." The audience roared, cementing the narrative in popular culture. But perhaps the most significant impact wasn't laughter. It was reflection. Editorials poured in, examining the deeper meaning of Patel's response. Commentators pointed out how his story echoed that of millions of immigrant families who had built their lives on the promise of America. It wasn't just about Patel versus Leavitt anymore. It was about what kind of country Americans wanted to be. Leavitt, meanwhile, went on the defensive. She released a late-night statement attempting to clarify, saying her comment was misinterpreted and that she respected the contributions of all Americans. But the damage was irreversible. Screenshots of her remark, paired with Patel's dignified reply, dominated every feed. Her words had been branded into the public memory, while Patel's had been elevated into a symbol of resilience. By sunrise, one headline summed it up perfectly. Leavitt spoke, Patel inspired, America chose. And yet, even as the memes spread, as hashtags trended, as pundits pontificated, there was an undercurrent building, a sense that something bigger was coming. Patel's moment hadn't just shocked the debate. It had cracked open a door. Because while the world was busy reacting online behind the scenes, phones were ringing, offers were being made, and political power players were suddenly looking at Patel with new eyes. The country thought the mic drop was the end of the story. But in truth, it was only the beginning. In the days that followed, the clip of Patel's counterattack was replayed so many times, it became more than just a debate moment. It became a teaching moment. For classrooms, for families gathered around, dinner tables, for anyone who had ever felt they didn't belong. Because what Patel did wasn't merely political theater. It was a reframing, a reminder that dignity outlasts hate, that service carries more weight than ancestry, and that unity always eclipses division. Leavitt's words had been sharp but hollow. They rang with the bitterness of exclusion, the instinct to divide. Patel's reply, in contrast, was rooted in something deeper, the conviction that being American is not a matter of birthplace, but of belief. Not about where you start, but about what you give back. His pause before speaking, his steady tone, his refusal to meet insult with insult, all of it conveyed a truth often forgotten in the noise of modern politics. Strength is not proven by volume, but by restraint. And so the moment transcended him. It became about us, about the nation itself. For generations, America's story has been written by those who came from elsewhere and chose to invest their lives here. Farmers, builders, soldiers, scientists, parents, each wave of people reshaping the land not by bloodlines, but by contribution. Patel's words echoed that lineage, drawing a straight line from Ellis Island to the present day, from soldiers at Normandy to firefighters on 9/11, from civil rights marchers in Selma to the doctors and nurses who braved the pandemic. The message was simple, but profound. Service is the true citizenship. It's a message as old as Lincoln's reminder that a house divided cannot stand, as urgent as King's dream that people be judged by character, not color. Patel didn't invent it, but he rekindled it, giving voice to something millions already felt, but had needed to hear aloud. We are bound not by ancestry, but by ideals. Even those who disagreed with Patel on policy felt that resonance. Letters poured in. Veterans thanked him for elevating service above slogans. Immigrant families wrote of showing their children the clip saying, "See, this is America, you belong." Teachers reported students debating it in class, not with anger, but with curiosity about what citizenship really means. And in that way, Patel's response became more than a rebuttal. It was a lesson in civics, Not the dry kind taught from textbooks, but the living kind forged in real time, where words can still shape hearts and shift history. Leavitt had meant to wound him with exclusion. Instead, she exposed the emptiness of a politics that divides. Patel, by contrast, gave America a mirror, one where people saw themselves not as fractured tribes, but as part of one great, messy, resilient family. The moral was impossible to ignore. Dignity endures where hate collapses. Service outshines ancestry. Unity defeats division. That was the story America walked away with. Not the insult, but the answer, and perhaps most powerful of all. Patel hadn't shouted his way into history. He had spoken softly, letting his words carry the weight. In a time when outrage often seems the only currency, he reminded the nation that composure, integrity, and principle remain priceless. For millions, that was the real mic drop. By the end of the week, the debate moment was no longer framed as a clash of egos. It was remembered as something else, a moral checkpoint, a pause in the chaos to ask ourselves, who are we? What do we stand for? And what kind of future are we building, not just for us, but for those who will come after? In Patel's answer, people found a vision of belonging that felt bigger than one debate, one election, or one political party. It felt, for a rare instant, like a glimpse of the America we aspire to be. And for millions watching, the lesson was clear. Do you want me to draft a final epilogue, 500, 600 words, that ties the entire narrative together, showing where Patel and Leavitt's paths went afterward and leaving readers with closure plus a final emotional punch? And so, we return to where it all began. One insult. 4 words, spat out with arrogance, meant to belittle and exclude. But instead of cutting down Kash Patel, they elevated him. Instead of shaming him, they shamed the speaker. Karoline Leavitt thought she was striking a blow. What she did was hand Patel the stage, and the opportunity to remind America of something greater than politics, greater than party, greater even than the debate itself. Her words, "Go back to India," were meant to divide. Patel's response united. His calm dignity turned venom into vision, hate into hope. That is why this moment will be remembered, not for the insult, but for the answer. It's a lesson we should all carry with us. Arrogance fades, but dignity endures. Division may grab headlines, but unity leaves a legacy, and that's why this story matters. Because it isn't just about Patel and Leavitt, it's about all of us, about the America we choose to be. Do we let hate have the final word, or do we rise above it with composure, courage, and conviction? If you believe in justice, if you believe in dignity, if you believe in an America where character is greater than insult, then don't let this moment pass. Share this story. Subscribe for more powerful truths. And join us as we continue to shine a light on the moments that define who we are. Because sometimes the most powerful victories don't come from shouting louder. They come from standing taller. And this was one of those victories.